From the Outreach Building on the University Park campus of Penn State University, this is Race for the Fifth with moderator Patty Satalia.
Good evening and welcome to WPSU's live debate between the candidates running for Pennsylvania's 5th Congressional District. Over the next hour, we'll ask the candidates to respond to questions that matter to you and find out where they stand on the issues. Tonight's debate is being simulcast on WPSU TV and FM and will feature questions from a range of sources, including the League of Women Voters of Centre County, viewers and listeners from across the 5th District, WPSU's debate staff, and from the candidates themselves, both of whom submitted one question for their opponent. In the interest of fairness, each candidate will be asked to answer his own question. Now, I'm pleased to introduce the candidates. Republican Glenn Thompson is seeking a third term as congressman for Pennsylvania's 5th Congressional District. His Democratic challenger, Charles Dumas, has a law degree and is a professor of theater at Penn State. Please join me in welcoming them to our studio. Someone in our audience obviously has a sense of humor because they submitted this question. Can you name all of the counties I'm sorry, let me first begin with the rules. Here are the rules for tonight's debate. That would be good. Each candidate will have an opportunity to answer every question. We strongly encourage candidates to challenge one another once both candidates have had an opportunity to answer the question, especially if they disagree with any factual information or feel further clarification is necessary. Candidates' answers will not be timed, but I will try to keep us moving along so that we can get to as many questions as possible. At the end of the debate, each candidate will have 1 minute for a closing statement. As decided by a coin toss earlier tonight, Charles Dumas will answer the first question, which is, sorry for that false start. And as I said, someone in the audience does have a sense of humor because they submitted this question. Can you name all of the counties in the 5th District? And if you can incorporate that into our real question, there will be bonus points. You've both traveled the 5th District. What is the biggest challenge facing the residents of the 5th District, and how do you what do you plan to do about it? We'll begin with you.
One of the things, first of all, I want to thank WPSU and you, Patty, and all of the staff. I want to thank you for offering us this opportunity to talk. And I also want to thank my opponent, Congressman Thompson, for his service. I know public service is very difficult and very hard, and so I want to thank everyone. Okay. Problem, what I have heard when I've traveled around in the district, the main thing that I've heard has been jobs in the economy. Some other folks kind of put it a different way, and they say poverty. And I was a little surprised by that because when I looked at the numbers coming from the 5th District and the various counties, I saw that our unemployment stats were lower than the national average. They weren't 8.3 or 7.8 or any. They were down in the 5s and 6s. So I thought, how could that possibly be? If jobs and the economy is the main problem, why is it identified when we have such a low unemployment numbers? And I realized it's not about jobs, it's about the quality of jobs. It's not about, whether or not people are working, it's the fact that people are working 2 jobs and not being paid very well. It's the fact that they don't see in the process of the employment, in the process of doing their jobs, that they're going to have a chance to get better, to put a little money aside for their children to go to school, to make things a little bit better. I see some college students who get out of college and they can't find the kind of jobs that are required that they can use their degrees. They can't find the high-tech jobs. So jobs in the economy, tied up with poverty. What's the solution for that? Well, the solution for that, it's a big district, and Congressman knows this. We have, we go all the way from Erie over to Potter, all the way down to Center and Clearfield and Huntington, Elk and Forest. I'm trying. I'm almost
That was 3.
So that was 5. But
okay, but he's counting.
And so they're kind of different. There's a whole bunch of different answers and solutions to that problem. First of all, we have to realize that the problem isn't all solved by the government. It has to be solved by the private sector. It has to be helped by the government. I agree with the congressman on that. We need to have a good environment for private sector to work. But we also need to be able to pay for that kind of support. We need to be able to find a way to do infrastructure development. We need to be able to find a way to help students find high-tech jobs and help them get through the schools. So Then we get down to taxes, but I'm going to hold that one until the next question. So jobs in the economy and poverty. Poverty is growing in this country. The difference between those who have and who have not, it's getting wider all the time. We're somewhere around Brazil at this particular point in terms of, and that's just not the economy and jobs. It's how do we make sure that everybody has an opportunity in this country.
And a solution?
The solution is to make sure that we work together and provide opportunities for our students, first of all, and to make sure that we have a safety net for those who may fall to the side, that we're going to be able to help each other get through it. That's been the Democratic Party way, and that's the way I think we're going to do it.
All right, Glenn Thompson.
Well, Patty, first of all, thank you. Thanks to my alma mater in this station for hosting this, and thanks to Charles for stepping into the ring to put yourself out there to seek to serve. Right? That's incredibly important. Jobs is a number one issue. As I travel the Congressional District, and I can name all 16 for you, but I think we want more questions than that. I travel the district extensively. When I'm not in Washington, I'm in the Congressional District. Month of August, for example, I had no mileage out of Washington, but on my own personal vehicle, I logged 4,970 miles the month of August, serving the 16 counties of the Pennsylvania 5th District, from Erie County to Tioga County and south down into now 2/3 of Huntington County. Jobs is a number one issue. You know, this evening, as we dined, there were 23 to 24 million Americans sitting around their dining room tables worrying about how to make ends meet, how to be able to provide for their families. Those are the folks that are unemployed and underemployed. And we have that here in the Pennsylvania 5th District. Now, we are fortunate in terms of our employment rate. Although in the Pennsylvania 5th, I'll tell you, we traditionally have the county with the lowest unemployment rate, and that's right here in Center County. But we also have the counties with some of the highest unemployment rates. What's interesting, though, here in Center County, we have one of the highest underemployed rates. When you look at the median income, there are a lot of folks working part-time jobs. And it's hard to make ends meet when you're working a part-time job. So what do we do about that? What is the solution for that? Well, it has to do with taking the burdens off the backs of our job creators. Government has never, ever created a sustainable job. Jobs are created by mostly small business owners, entrepreneurs, willing to take a risk, willing to sacrifice, willing to create a business to make that investment. Over 70% of our jobs come from small businesses, but they're sitting on the sidelines right now because of taxes, regulations, and energy costs. You know, Japan, in the middle of a tsunami, an earthquake, and a nuclear meltdown, had the courage to lower their corporate tax rate because they were the highest in the world. Now we're the highest, least competitive place to do business. In terms of regulations, baseline regulations are very important, health and safety. But beyond that, when it gets too high, it becomes a burden on job creators. And energy costs. There's no business today, frankly no family today, that's not suffering under almost $4 a gallon gas right here in Pennsylvania. And those things that there are solutions out there. I've both supported and helped and co-sponsored legislation and helped pass it out of the House that would address all three of those areas that really would unleash take the uncertainty off of small business owners so that we could see jobs grow. Now, Pennsylvania has a fairly low unemployment rate compared to the nation, but that's because of the private sector. That's because of the opportunities we've been blessed with frankly, natural gas and related jobs. Low natural gas costs is good for manufacturing, and those are important jobs as well.
And we'll come back to the jobs question a little bit later in the debate. But due to a decline in population, Pennsylvania lost a seat in Congress following the 2010 census. With one less representative from Pennsylvania, your seat is more important than ever. Redistricting is a highly politicized process designed to benefit the party in power. As one congressman said, voters only think they're choosing their elected official, but it's elected officials who choose them. What, if anything, would you do to reform the redistricting process? And I begin with you, Glenn Thompson.
Well, you know what? I think the redistricting process actually is pretty good the way it is. And absolutely, the party, now we're talking about in the state legislature, you know, they make that decision. But You know, that's been done every 10 years since the Constitution has been formed. Every 10 years we do the census, and it's adjusted. You know, I take exception to the fact that whoever said that the elected officials pick their constituents. I don't think that's true. I think, especially in the House, it's the people's House. Our founders were, I think, wise when they made it a 2-year term. And that means that you have to work each and every day in doing your job, and in order to earn re-election, that's the way I view it. It's earned. The seat that I serve in is not my seat. This seat belongs to the citizens of the Pennsylvania 5th Congressional District, and that's 703,000 citizens across 23% of the landmass of Pennsylvania.
So, some say that the way that the lines are redrawn make no geographical sense.
Well, I'll tell you the challenges, and it comes back to the Constitution with that. You have to take the population divided by the number of seats that Pennsylvania will have, and you have to bring it down to a variance of 1 person. That's pretty challenging. And sometimes, unfortunately, that's why we even see sometimes townships being split, certainly counties being split. I think there's a concerted effort to try to stay within those municipal lines, but you have to get it constitutionally within a variance of 1 citizen.
Charles Dumas.
I'm going to kind of disagree with the congressman. I think that it hasn't been a fair process. I think the redistricting of the 5th district, and probably in the state of Pennsylvania, all of the districts are a bit of a joke. And let's be real. What happens is the party in power is the party that is going to shape it in the best way they can maintain their power. And I think the Democrats would probably do the same kind of thing. I would hope that we do it a little fair, but with the same kind of thing. I think the real answer is to make sure that we have input from people, from the citizens, from those who vote into the process. Now, how do you go about doing that? I'm not sure. I know you can't do it from Congress. You have to do it on the state level because our Constitution, as the Congressman points out, puts that in the hands of the states. But to say that it has been a fair redistribution is not exactly accurate.
This next question is really in the hands of the states, but because states nationwide have been grappling over voter ID laws, and with so much confusion out there, we thought it was worth pursuing here. The Commonwealth Court issued a preliminary injunction on Pennsylvania's new voter ID law, postponing the full implementation until after November's presidential election. What's your reaction to the court's decision? Charles Dumas.
I have 2 reactions, Patty. I have one as a candidate and I have one as a person. In 1964, as a 19-year-old who wasn't even eligible to vote, because back in those days you had to be 21, I went with 2,500 other young people to the state of Mississippi in order to register people to vote, in order to register black people to vote, because at that time the franchise wasn't extended to African Americans in the state of Mississippi. Only 7% of the eligible voters in the state of Mississippi could vote. There were various places, poll taxes, literary exams, terrorism, Ku Klux Klan, White Citizens Council, and we went there and people put their lives on the line for the right to vote, for the right for everyone to participate in the process, because that's how America works. Full participation, as much participation. Everybody, 1 person, 1 vote. I had friends who died in this process. There were others who lost their jobs. There were others who had to leave the state. To come to Pennsylvania and have a political party, and I think this is accurate, a political party who puts into place a law, a photo ID law, for the express purpose of trying to win an election. And I'm not saying this. The head of the Republican Party in the state of Pennsylvania said, hey, now we've got it for Romney. To put that in place is an insult to those people who passed. It's an insult to the work of those of us who work for the franchise for every single person.
Glenn Thompson, my guess is you see this differently.
A little bit. First of all, it wasn't the head of the Republican Party in Pennsylvania who said that. It was an elected official, but it wasn't, and I thought that was an inappropriate comment that he made at the time. You know, I don't think there's anything more precious than our individual right to vote, and it needs to be protected. And I appreciate all the patriots that work to achieve that and achieve the quality. Just as I appreciate the men and women serving in uniform. And since the time of the Patriots through today, including my son and daughter-in-law, my son who bled for this country, was wounded. for our freedoms and our liberties. When it comes to the voter ID law, I was pleased that it was found constitutional, because that was a constitutional question. I also think it was reasonable that there was a delay in implementation beyond this specific election cycle to be able to do additional education and awareness and help with the implementation. I don't think that's unreasonable at all. I think that's important to make sure we don't run into some of the issues that I think my good friend has a concern with. At the same time, I don't think it's unreasonable to make sure we protect the integrity of each and every individual vote. Voter fraud happens. There was a congressional candidate, and this is a top level, the congressional candidate down in the York area that was running, and she was on the ballot until it was found out that she had voted in the last election, both in Pennsylvania and in Florida, in the same election. If it can happen at that level, we need to make sure that we protect the integrity of each and every vote.
You have a follow-up, Charles Dumas.
This was a solution looking for a problem. Voter fraud in terms of ID is not a problem in Pennsylvania. It's not been a problem. There have been 5 cases over the last 10 years. To say that this was put into place in order to protect the franchise, I think is inaccurate, Congressman. The reason it was put into place, whether it was the elected official or not, it was put into place in order to put some kind of barrier between those who don't have access to photo ID, the senior citizens, the youth, college students who may not have cars, poor people who may be a little nervous about having to go and produce their ID, good Americans who should be allowed to vote. It was not there because there was a problem. It was not a problem.
Okay, we'll move. This next question, which I will read, was written by candidate Dumas for his opponent, Congressman Thompson. Since your voting record for the last 4 years shows a distinct reluctance to do so, if you are reelected, will you work with President Obama and the Democrats in Congress to pass laws and bills that will benefit the people of Pennsylvania?
My good friend's going to have to look a little closer at my record, and we can sit and talk about this if you need a little mentoring on or tutoring. I don't introduce bills for the reason of a press release. I introduce bills, I work on bills because I want them to pass. I want them to make a difference in the lives of the people I'm serving and the people that I work for. And I don't work for a party and I don't work for leadership. I work for the citizens of the Pennsylvania 5th Congressional District. So that's one of the reasons when it comes to education issues, which I have a passion for, I co-chair with my good friend from Rhode Island, Jim Langevin, the Career and Technical Education Caucus. I've worked with him to develop legislation in a bipartisan manner to put into the framework of the legislation that's going to update No Child Left Behind and hopefully change it dramatically, restore local control and letting teachers teach. I've also, the STEP Act, which is a telemedicine bill that the President of the United States signed into public law on New Year's Eve. I didn't do that by myself. I did that in a bipartisan way. You know, I worked with a gentle lady from Nevada, a Democrat, now running for Senate out there, actually, that was my co-sponsor. The VETS Act, which I'm working with Congressman Charlie Rangel out of New York. He's my co-sponsor. We're doing it in a bipartisan way. So I'm very proud of my record as a lawmaker and working in a bipartisan fashion, actually.
I will say that lots of emails that came into us expressed deep frustration with the 112th Congress, especially with regard to partisanship. Carl Mizieski of State College writes, America is angry with its legislators. A recent poll showed that only 10% of the voting public approved of the way Congress was doing its job, with 85% disapproving.
Yeah, you know what, and I understand that. I'm disappointed with the overall Congress. But you have to remember, Congress is bicameral. It's the House of Representatives and it's the Senate. And I would argue, and I would show for the record, that we've had one of the most productive House of Representatives the past 2 years in the 112th Congress in recent history. The number of bills that we have passed and have gone to the Senate and have received no attention whatsoever. And some people will say, well, that's because...
4% passed in the 2009-2010 session.
Overall. I'm talking ones passed out of the House of Representatives who now have gone to the Senate. It's a bicameral institution. And unfortunately, Senator Harry Reid refuses to bring these bills up. That's very frustrating. And I don't think it's necessary. If the Senator Reid doesn't like the bills we sent, I understand that. Rarely does a bill pass in the same form in both chambers. That's what the conference committee is for. So I've encouraged Senator Reid in the Senate, if if these are important issues, if jobs are important issues, past legislation has to do with it. We passed our bill, you pass your bill, and then we'll bring it to conference committee. But instead, it's been stalemated. And that's very frustrating for everybody, including those of us who are working hard every day to do our best in serving the needs of the constituents.
Okay, and that question back to you, Charles Dumas.
What will you do? Can I respond to that question first, though?
Well, let me ask you this and then respond to it. What will you do to end partisan politics in Washington?
Well, first of all, I will make sure I sit down with the other side. First of all, I will work with the President of the United States, who, whether it's a Republican or a Democrat, I hope it's a Democrat, but whoever it is, and I will sit down with the other party and make sure that we try to find and negotiate and find those things which are going to be good for the people of our districts and the people of the country. It's kind of how I was raised. I go back to a time when there was a guy named Senator Everett Dirksen and a guy named Jerry Ford who was president, and they sort of were able to sit down. And I'm going to even bring up another name called Ronald Reagan, who was able to sit down with the other side and work out stuff. But I do need to respond a little bit to the last question. It's, you know, Congressman, you voted 91% with the party. And all of those bills that sort of went through that you got onto the Senate, I mean, 33 times that bill was repeal of the Affordable Health Care Act. And it seems to me that the message would have come through before 33 times. That it was not going to get through the Senate, and if it got through the Senate, it wasn't going to be passed by the president.
Have you met that Senate?
Yeah.
33 times probably isn't enough.
Yeah,
That's sending the message.
Yeah, but the message, it seems to me, at some point, the message, you know, it's a bicameral message as well. That you need to sit down with folks and figure out what is going to work instead of just trying to pass it on. I would suggest.
And my point being, and what I've already said this, is the Senate doesn't have to pass the exact same bill, and rarely do they in any form. But pass something so that we can then take it to a conference committee, because that's where the ultimate compromise occurs. But when Senator Reid has shut that down. Now let me say about the president. I didn't vote for the president. I don't think there's any secret of that. I didn't support him. But when he was elected, I wanted him to succeed, because he's the president of the United States. And if he failed, the country fails. Well, I look forward to working in a bipartisan way. You know, when he was first elected and I was first elected, I brought almost 30 years of healthcare experience to Washington. I knew we could improve our healthcare system, whether it was cost or access or innovation or patient control. You know what? I love what you said about being bipartisan. Unfortunately, this president doesn't know how to do that. Was never invited to the White House, although my colleagues, the Democratic colleagues, even in my freshman class, were taken there multiple times and to work. So it's one thing. I never, put it this way, I never refused an opportunity to sit down with the president to work on health care or any other issue.
Let me go to our next question, which is a health care question, and in fact it's Glenn Thompson's question, and it ties with bipartisanship as the major concern that was expressed to us prior to this debate. This is Congressman Thompson's question for candidate Dumas. You have stated your support for government-run, single-payer health care. How would you pay for this?
Well, I knew it was going to come up sooner or later, and I'm a politician, and I'm sitting here and I'm talking about taxes, and I'm talking about taxes in the sense of raising them. But I'm talking about not raising taxes on the middle class, because I don't think that we can do that. I think that we have to look at ways to raise taxes on those people who are in the upper 1–2% of earners and folks in this country. Because for the last 10 years, if we look at what's been going on, in this country, we see that the middle class has lost, not necessarily income value, but value. There's been a 40% loss of value. Back in 2008 or 2007, I went in and looked at my TIA Clef retirement account and almost had a heart attack because it had lost 35% overnight. And that was my retirement. My mortgage went down, all of this stuff. It was a big hole. We were in trouble. And so the middle class needs to maintain the tax breaks that we have in place. But however, if you look at the same folks in the top 2%, we have had an increase in their net worth. We've had an increase over time. I don't know exactly the numbers, but it's been between 5 and 10% over the same time period. So I say it's time for those people who are in the top bracket And the president has said $500,000 and above, and that's, I'm not there, so I have to figure out where that number is. It's probably the millionaires and above, that they need to pay their fair share, that we go from 35% taxation rate to a 39.5%, 5.5%, that's not much. I would pay for it that way. If you go back and look at when we were in trouble in this country, I mean, we almost had a depression. We didn't have a depression. We almost had a depression. I think through the work of Congress and through the work of the president, we avoided that. We had a bad recession. But the way we got out of the depression, there was a 50 to 70% tax rate on the top earners in this country. I think it's time for them to pay their fair share. And part of that is to go in and pay the single-payer process.
Okay, the same question to you, Congressman Thompson. What do you propose for Americans who are without health care coverage, if not Obama's Affordable Care, which was upheld by the U.S. Supreme Court?
Sure. Well, let me just say, first of all, the folks that my friends talking about raising taxes on, you know, that's a million small businesses in this country would fall into that category. Ernst and Young, who is the fourth largest accounting company and organization in the United States, have estimated that would cost about 700,000 jobs by their estimates. That's not what we need at this time. It is, what would I do? And frankly, to pay for a single payer, I think the things that would happen, it would cost us, I believe, our individual liberties. It would cost us jobs, and it would cost us more debt. What would I do? You know, I've done it. Long before the Patient Protection Affordable Care Act was dreamed up in a back room where folks with health care experience were not allowed at the table. And that includes a lot of my Democratic colleagues, actually. Rank and file were very frustrated as well, not being able to give input in the construction of this. Long before that, in July of 2009, I was original co-sponsor on a bill that's called Putting Patients First Act. That bill addresses a lot of the issues. It honors the four principles that I practiced in my healthcare career, which were to whatever we did in healthcare should lower the cost of healthcare for every American, increase access, make sure America remain the place of innovation and quality for healthcare, and that it should be the patient, not a bureaucrat, not a politician.
But how do people who don't have insurance get this? Well,
that's a part of the Affordable Care, or it's not a part of the Affordable Care Act. There's nothing affordable about that. It's about to put one framework and a good start may be the Putting Patients First Act. And that's where we allow greater competition purchase across state lines. That's where we strengthen our federal qualified health centers, which are a great model in this country where people are able to go to and access care. It was originally just physical health. Now they've expanded into dental because dental is one of the most underserved areas of health. And you do it, it's means tested, so you're able to go and you pay basically what you can afford to get good quality care. It addresses and bring down the cost of health care by having medical malpractice reform. It addresses pre-existing conditions, but it's different from the Affordable Care Act. The Affordable Care Act provides folks access to affordable insurance with pre-existing conditions by using a community rating system. And that's something that just raises dramatically the cost of everybody else's health care. It's been over a $2,000 increase since the bill's passed. The version I support establishes high-risk pools in each state. Federal government contributes, state government contributes, and the person needing the insurance who happens to have the pre-existing condition is able to purchase it from that pool at an affordable rate. And there's so much more that we can do.
Let me ask this.
Can I respond a little bit to that? It seems to me that, you know, the United States, as the congressman has pointed out, and I think correctly, the United States has the best health system in terms of the doctors and nurses and machines and technology, and we are down in about 23rd in terms of health care for providing health care for our citizens. That we are not, the safety net is one of the things that keeps worker morale up there. I mean, one of the things about the CARE Act is that people who know that they are going to be, I hate to use the word taken care of, but provided for when they slip, when they have an accident, when they have to go to the hospital, when they know that that's going to be taken care of, they feel better, they work better, they participate better. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Let me ask this follow-up because
Sure.
I think addresses some of this. This comes from physician Ronald Fisher of State College, who writes, quote, Medicare's overhead is roughly 5%. Insurance companies have overhead costs of 20% to 30%, reflecting costs for administration, advertising, and profit. That overhead is one of the major reasons the U.S. spends more than 12% of GNP on health, while the U.K. spends less than 7%, and with better outcomes. Why is the free market better than the government in providing care to consumers? And this question goes first to Glenn Thompson.
Well, that overhead cost is kind of interesting, and one of the reasons, if that's accurate, and I appreciate the question, and I'm sure it is, since it was offered. But at the same time, the difference between Medicare and a third-party coverage, Medicare pays 80 to 90 cents to a hospital and a doctor for every dollar of care that they provide. If you sold newspapers and you sold them for $1 and the government told you could charge no more than 90 cents, the question to ask yourself, how many newspapers can you afford to sell before you actually go bankrupt? So it's not just overhead. I would also argue that having worked in healthcare for almost 30 years, serving people facing life-changing disease and disability, the overhead cost of compliance with Medicare is significant. When you just look at the cost of, and almost any doctor and healthcare provider hospital would tell you this, their overhead costs, over 60% of their overhead costs just deals with complying with Medicare billing. Just the billing part, not the compliance with the Health Insurance Privacy and Portability Act, HIPAA, and they don't know what the costs are of the over 130 new bureaucracies, agencies that are now being created under the Patient Protection Act, because each one of those will have a cost of compliance. To me, that's a recipe for bankruptcy, and the first hospitals and providers to close will be in rural America and underserved urban areas, and that's unacceptable. That's not access.
I'd like to get underneath this issue, just a little bit. We've had a lot of problems over time in America, and problems of public policy. One, way back in the 19th century, was education. People wiser than us decided that it was really important for everybody in America to get an education. So that we provided schools, we provided public education, we made sure that people had to go to school, that young people had to go to school. That's how we dealt with the problem of education, because we thought that education was important to every single person. In the 50s, as after World War II, there was this notion that it might be good to provide transportation for people to get around, so we could have the suburbs and all of that, so that there would be a possibility of moving around the country with a little bit more facility. But the government didn't provide a car for everyone. But Eisenhower, a Republican, provided the interstate highway system. It seems to me that we have to decide, is health like education, or is health like automobile transportation? I think it's like education. It's something that's vital, it's important, and it's important for every single person.
All right, and we move now to climate change. This next question comes from Mike Kamendolas of Kersey in Elk County. Quote, the vast majority of the world's climate scientists agree that human-induced climate change is occurring. And most of them also agree that if either business as usual or greatly increased fossil fuel consumption goes on, there could be some very sudden and dangerous changes in the planet's natural climate systems. If you are elected to Congress, what steps would you support to reduce our country's consumption of fossil fuels? We begin with you, Charles Dumas.
First of all, I'd like to echo and repeat that global warming is a major problem. It's not just a U.S. problem. It's not just a Pennsylvania problem. I believe it's the problem on the planet Earth. 1% over the last decade. There's a chance that we may drop from 6 to 9 degrees by the year 2030, which is going to result in a devastation on the planet in terms of people all over. We've already had issues of climate change affecting the strength of hurricanes and other weather conditions. So we need to address the problem. So the idea of how do we deal with it by dealing with fossil fuels. The United States throws more CO2 up into the air than China, India, and Japan combined. Interestingly enough, China is in the process of getting closer to us, and as they use coal and the fossil fuels to develop their industrial technology, they're going to pass us at some point. So the answer is not how do we restrict the use of fossil fuels. And in Pennsylvania, the idea of restricting fossil fuels is almost deadly for somebody who's trying to run for office. But we do need to begin to look at alternative energy sources. We need to look at wind, we need to look at solar, we need to look at anything that is going to replace fossil fuels, and we need to look closer at fossil fuel consumptions. We need to figure out how we're going to stop the global warming process. Now, you're going to say, okay, I know the congressman is sitting over, he's getting ready to write it down, he's going to say jobs. If you start talking about cutting back on fossil fuels in Pennsylvania, you're going to talk about jobs. Yes, I think that's true. I think that we can talk about losing some jobs in terms of fossil fuels, but if we somehow or other develop infrastructure, develop industry to create alternative energy sources, which is needed not only for Pennsylvania and the U.S., but for the planet, we can replace those jobs. And we can replace those jobs using students who are coming out of our universities who have been trained to do that kind of technology.
Glenn Thompson.
I'm not sure about global warming, but I can tell you climate change occurs. I think that there's some debate among researchers of which direction we're going, but we know there's climate change. We live in a beautiful part of the Ridge and Valley section of Pennsylvania, where these valleys were carved from mountains with huge sheets of ice. And if we dig around in our backyards enough, we possibly could find a sea creature fossil. So does the climate change? Absolutely. So let's talk about the contributing factors. If it's CO2, here's the good news. The Department of Energy released a report this summer that talked about the first quarter in terms of, well, let me also say that 98% of CO2, greenhouse gases, comes from energy production. 2% everything else. The Department of Energy released some data that shows that the first quarter of this year, our CO2 emissions due to energy in the United States were 8% lower than just a year ago.
That was partly because of the recession.
It's a lot of things, but it had nothing to do with the government mandating and dictating and trying to crush our economy. It was natural gas, the advent of that, and that was occurring because of being on private lands and not public lands. It was about technology. It was about the market, the private sector, and so not only that, it's the lowest level of CO2 since 1992. And so I would, that's what we need to learn from that. And the fact is we need to look at, and I would predominantly put technology out there, technology and innovation, because we need all of our energy sources. We need to be independent of the Middle East. And there's really nothing that's going to be in a position to replace fossil fuels for a very long time. I'm very supportive of the Department of Energy in terms of research and development. I think our national energy labs are outstanding professionals, and they're looking for that energy source post-fossil fuels. But they'll tell you it's a long ways off. We need to look at, when we make policy decisions regarding this, cost-benefit analysis. And we have to eliminate capital cronyism. I mean, I have a list of 32 different energy companies that received monies and have since gone belly up from this administration. Over $7 billion worth of what was stimulus monies that created no jobs. What we do need to do, though, when it comes to climate change, is we need to learn to adapt. Now, I was very proud. I chair the largest subcommittee in agriculture, conservation, energy, and forestry watersheds. And I was proud to support the Department of Agriculture, USDA, with a grant that they made to the forestry department right here at Penn State, because they're looking at what happens with our forests, what is really a national treasure, especially our hardwoods. We have the best hardwood cherry. If the temperature varies 2 degrees one way or the other, the question should be, what happens? What happens to that forest? What happens to that commodity that we have? So it's adaptation, research and development for new energy sources, and adaptation.
Adaptation? What's your response?
Well, the first thing, I have a bit of a problem, because the congressman doesn't do this often because he's a responsible public servant, but characterizing the government as out there trying to destroy businesses and destroy, I think the government is the collective voice of all of us trying to manifest policy which is going to be good for the most of us, if not all of us. That's number one. But I
don't think they're trying to destroy. Okay. I think this administration has been really bad at making investments.
I think this administration is trying to get us out of a hole that this administration did not put us in, and it's been trying.
Well, we started out at $9.5 trillion in debt on inauguration day, and today we're pushing over $16 trillion.
Well,
so I don't know how much. It sounds like they're digging a deeper hole.
No, it sounds like we started off not at. We'll go back a little bit further, and we started off with not a deficit, but but a surplus. And the administration which preceded that put us into that hole. All I'm suggesting, I know we're going into a different place here.
we need to keep a rule for Patty in this debate, I guess.
All I'm suggesting is, I want to pick up on one little thing that the congressman said, and that is, I wasn't there, and I know you weren't there because I'm a little bit older than you are, but World War II, we had a Navy that was devastated. There was a form of energy, and I'm not necessarily pushing this far, but there's a form of energy that wasn't even thought about called nuclear energy, that somehow or other got put into place within 5 years. It was a concept in 1939 and became a reality in terms of harmful atomic energy, but atomic energy became, because there was a will to do it, because there was a need to do it, because there was a war. I think that global warming is one of those things that we need to have the same kind of urgency. And I don't think it's going to take 20 years. I don't think it's going to take 10 years. I think that if we put our resources together with the minds that we have in America, we can create alternative energy sources as fast as we did atomic energy.
I have one follow-up question to the global warming, and this one comes from Bob Potter of Bollesburg. But other countries are expanding use of renewable energy to meet the twin challenges of energy security and climate change. 61% of Norway's energy comes from renewable sources, for example. His question: where do you stand on continuing subsidies and tax breaks for fossil fuel industries, and would you support extending those same incentives and subsidies that the coal and gas industries have received to wind, solar, and other forms of renewable energy? We begin with Glenn Thompson.
Sure. Actually, the alternative energies that you named, wind, solar specifically, are heavily subsidized by the federal government. I don't support subsidizing something to commercialize it before it's ready for prime time. That's where I said I support research and development. We need to find how we make wind and solar consistently work. There are places I think it probably works really well, but there are other places where it doesn't work. And let me also say there's no such thing as clean energy. Every energy source has some type of unintended consequences that have to be remediated. And when it comes to fossil fuels, fossil fuels are not subsidized in the sense of handouts. They do, folks who have those companies, those businesses, they enjoy the same tax deductions that every other business owner enjoys in the country. Now, I happen to think that we need to simplify the tax code, and I would do away with those corporate tax loops, as I would lower the tax rates for everyone. But certainly, I would eliminate those, those deductions.
No, I think that I would, if I got to Congress, I would work with my fellow Congress people to make sure that we added more into solar, going back to the thing, and more into wind and alternative energy sources, because I think we need to address not only alternative energy to become energy independent, but also we need to address the issue of global warming, the issue of,
This next question goes back to jobs, which we...
Did I miss something? I probably missed a meeting, but has the oil depletion allowance gone away? Is that?
The depletion allowances on all types of businesses are out there in terms of business expensing. I happen to think that should go away. I would simplify the tax code. I would take that down to 10 and 25%.
But I thought I heard you say that we didn't subsidize fossil fuel.
We do not subsidize fossil fuels. It is a part of the tax code. Is the tax code a problem? It is. Is it overly complex? It is.
Well, the annual tax breaks for that industry is $4 billion a year.
Yeah.
Well, and there are tax breaks for every industry, and I would assume, depending on the size of the industry, Patty, you will get similar numbers for a lot of different industries when it comes to tax breaks. I think that's symptomatic of a complex tax code that needs to be simplified. The rates need to be brought down, and I think if we did that, we'd have more revenue coming in than what we do now.
Because President Obama is talking about reducing those tax breaks to big oil, and in fact, the world's 5 largest oil corporations, which include ExxonMobil, receive $2.4 billion of that.
And their profit, as I've looked at this, is very similar to percentage-wise to most other industries. They're in the same range, high single digit of actual profit. They just have a lot more money because it's a larger business. It doesn't surprise me President Obama's talking about that, because he's really good about picking winners and losers and about dividing the country. And I think that's just an act of division. That's not a solution forward when we're facing all the problems regarding jobs, and I guess that's the next question.
In fact, it is. And let me move on to jobs, or we won't get there. Yeah. The 5th District, as we've talked about, is geographically the largest district in Pennsylvania, also the least densely populated. This next question comes to us from Emily Gill. She's from the western part of the district in Oil City, Venango County, and she is concerned about economic development.
With so many young professionals groups starting in the 5th District, including one right here, what kind of legislation or initiatives would you support to help those 20 and 30-somethings start the businesses that they've dreamed of and provide a great quality of life for them while living and working in the 5th District?
And that first answer comes from Charles Dumas.
I was just out there in Venango, and this last weekend before we were out there looking at the museum. The oil museum just reopened, and it's a great question. In fact, I'm going to answer it this way. One of the things that happened a few years ago, and it wasn't even under this present administration, was there was some help to start up small businesses in some of the rural areas within the 5th District. And that was good. That was a good thing. I'm for that, and I'm sure the congressman was for that. I talked to a person who owned a coffee shop, whatnot shop. It wasn't in Venango, but it was in one of the other counties, and who was in trouble, because she said that after she got started, there wasn't any money that was able to help them go on. So I think it's not just the issue of how do we help young professionals and how do we help young small businesses start, but how do we make sure we sustain that process? How do we sustain that growth? And for that, we need revenue. And we go back to the tax policy. How do we make sure that we have revenue to sustain the process? And second, we need to help in the infrastructure development. One of the things that I've been talking about, and I'm just looking at it, I haven't got the answer and I haven't got the plans, but can we look again at light rail? We talked about that about 10, 15 years ago, and I know it's primarily a state thing, but can we look at light rail to develop transportation, easier transportation between some of the smaller areas and some of the urban areas? Can we find a way to have this energy source? Wouldn't it be wonderful? I mean, wouldn't it be wonderful? Pennsylvania has been at the cornerstone of energy development in America from the beginning. Mm-hmm. You start with lumber, you go to oil. I mean, the first oil wells were here, right there in Oil City. Coal, natural gas now. Wouldn't it be wonderful if Pennsylvania could also now become the cornerstone of the development of alternative energy as well? That we help in the process, government and private sector, hand in hand, to build that.
Yeah. Well, actually, oil was in Titusville, and they get a little touchy about that. You know what, there's a lot of things that we need to do and things that I work on a daily basis. Basically connecting young entrepreneurs like Emily to the Small Business Administration to begin with. Emily's not looking for a handout. Mm-mm. She's looking for an opportunity to earn a hand up. She's looking for an opportunity to create and to build something on her own. She's not looking for government to do it with her. She wants government to get out of her way. And government's in her way. I mean, when you think about just the taxes that come right off the top of any efforts that she'll take, when you think about the regulations that she has to deal with, depending on what type of business that she has, when you think about the energy costs at $4 a gallon gas, or just about there, that is just crushing right now. Now, the Small Business Administration is something we work very closely with, and they have great programs. They provide great technical assistance. We have the small business development centers, like right here at Penn State, who are workforce development professionals that are willing to work with our small businesses and help them. There's a specific line of programs that I deal with on the Agriculture Committee, and it's designed for young farmers, young ranchers. That's really tough to get somebody who's never been in agriculture to become a farmer. Mm-hmm. And when you have somebody who has that interest, you really need to try to make it easy for them, as easy as possible with technical assistance and with assistance through some of the different programs that we have. And those are all programs that I have supported legislatively, and I'm very proud that we've got some great new starts as a result of that. People that are creating jobs, contributing to the economy, and living out the American dream of greater opportunity.
Can we look at the transcript again? I could have sworn that Emily said, "What are we going to do to help in the process?" I could have sworn I heard that.
Well, I think Emily probably wants us to get out of the way.
Ah, okay. That's not what I heard her say, though. I heard her say, "What can you do in Congress?" But that's all right.
Well, we have another chance to answer this. This is another economy question, this one from Andy Close. We recorded this during our visit to Bradford, Pennsylvania.
At Bradford Regional Airports and other small rural airports across the 5th Congressional District, the specter of the federal Essential Air Service program being cut completely from the budget is a very real concern. The conventional argument is to cut the fat out of a bloated federal budget. If elected, would you fight to continue to keep a line item program in place in the wake of efforts in Washington to do so? And in your opinion, what type of impact do these small airports have on their rural communities?
And I believe, Glenn Thompson, you're first for that question.
Well, I appreciate Andy's question. I'm actually probably the #1 supporter of the Essential Air Service out of 435 members of Congress. It's incredibly important. Why is it important? It's important for the economies. There are some that do not like them. They do not like small rural airports. I happen to believe that if you believe in the Constitution and the federal role in commerce, that if we're going to pave roads in rural America, we also need to have interstate transportation when it comes to our airport. So the Essential Air Service is incredibly important. I've been involved, even though I'm not on the Transportation Infrastructure Committee. That is something I've been very much involved in. Now, I also think that you need to be accountable with it. So I was okay with some of the changes that in the most recent reauthorization that we did that said to be eligible that our rural airports need to get up to at least 10 deployments a day. That means 10 people getting onto the airport and I think that's reasonable. Now, that also sets a that sets a bar. That sets a bar for our local communities and also the vendor, whoever the airline is, to be marketing, to promote our rural airports so that we hit that average of 10 a day. And I think we can get there. The Bradford McKean in McKean County is doing great things. They're seeing some natural gas growth there. I think it's incredible opportunity.
Okay, and let's move to
can I
Charles
respond?
Dumas. You may.
Yeah. You know, when you're right, you're right. I agree with the congressman. I think that we need to keep it in place, and if I get there, I'm going to help support it.
This next question. The first bill President Barack Obama signed into law was the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act, which allows women a fair and reasonable opportunity to sue over paycheck discrimination. Women are expected to play a key role in this year's presidential election, which is why we've chosen this next question from Paul O'Hearn of State College. And I'll ask this he directed it actually to Congressman Thompson, but we'll come back to Charles Dumas. Congressman Thompson, you voted no to the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act. Can you explain your vote, and would you vote any differently today?
No, I don't think I would. I did vote no. For a number of reasons. Number one, it's against the law. Under Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights and many laws since then, you cannot discriminate for any reason, let alone for gender. So the law is clearly the law. I had concerns with some of the time limits, to tell you the truth. You have to remember where we were in January of 2009. I mean, the economy was just as bad as what it is today. We were bleeding to death in jobs. We were losing businesses. And the time limits that were imposed as a part of that legislation, many times it seemed like what it would be was the people who could really testify, the folks who really would have been accountable, the supervisors who provide the testimony to substantiate one way or the other. It was long enough ago that they're long since dead, actually. And so this really appeared to me, first of all, the law is clear, you can't discriminate. But secondly, it really appeared to be a stimulus for trial lawyers. And you know what? We saw an increase of about 18, I think it was 14% in incidents immediately when the president signed that into law. And it's not what we should have been focused on. You know, since that time, there's been 451,000 women have lost their jobs in the United States.
But they're still making 77 cents to a man's dollar.
Well, there's also a study that shows that by the Department of Labor, excuse me, that the and this is the President's Department of Labor, okay, that showed that on the average that the men were working somewhere around 8.7, 8.8 hours a day average, and women were working 8.01. A lot of that, I don't know. We need to look. Is that choice? Is it?
Okay, and I have to move along because we have less than 2 minutes before closing comments.
I think that the Congressman used exactly the right word, discriminate, but he's talking about it in the wrong direction. I would vote for it, number one, after, you know, it's fair, it's right, and it deals with the issue of discrimination. It deals with the fact that women working in our economy are getting 77% to the dollar that the man is getting, and it's an injustice that's been in place too long. It's an injustice that should have been fixed after World War II, and it's something that we need to support. We need to support equal pay for equal job, or equal jobs and equal pay. Absolutely.
And I don't know if we have time for this. The focus of tonight's presidential debate is foreign policy, so I'll ask real quickly with just a couple of seconds, what do you consider to be the most pressing foreign policy issue facing the U.S. today, Charles Dumas? The
Middle East, without question. And I think that the way we handle the Middle East is something that we need to make sure that Republicans and Democrats sit down and the President sits down and deal with it.
Okay, less than a minute.
Specifically, it's Iran. Since the time that this president took office, the number of centrifuges that Iran has that uses to develop weapons-grade uranium has increased at least double. And that's a serious concern when you have a leadership in a country that's been real clear that they are intent on destroying first Israel and then the United States. That's a pretty scary situation.
Okay. We now have 1 minute for closing statements, and we will begin with Glenn Thompson.
Well, thank you. Thank you, WPSU, for this event. And during a stop at a gas station to fill my car, I had an experience that said it all about this election's importance. As I pumped $3.95 a gallon gas into my car, I heard a voice calling my name. And I realized the voice came from the next pump from a woman filling her late model Ford Thunderbird. She spoke just 3 words to me, but repeated them twice. Things are hard. Things are hard. In 3 words, I could see the desperation she was dealing with. Now, I assume she is struggling like so many today, including the 23 million Americans unemployed or underemployed. Now, I've been proud to sponsor and vote for legislation that lifts difficulties from the shoulders of this family and others through legislation that grows jobs, economic growth, and affordable energy. Now, I look forward to continuing this fight for her and for you. I'm Congressman G.T. Thompson, and my record is proven as a lawmaker, a public servant, and a leader. And I'm running for re-election, and I ask your vote for Congress. Thank you, and God bless.
Charles Dumas, 1 minute for your closing statement.
I'm running for Congress, and I need your help and support. I pledge to work with, not against, the President of the United States. I will work to support unions. I will work to support education and our League of Teachers. I will work to ensure equal pay for workers, no matter their gender. I will work to protect our environment. We must summon our courage, our tenacity to dream the dream again, to fight the fight. This election is way too important. We can't quit on Pennsylvania. Fill every available seat in the legislature with someone who truly represents the people's interest and their aspirations. We can't quit on America. We can't quit on our president. Given the right partners in government like a Congress which works with him, we know that great things are possible. We have seen them already. Affordable health care, helping viable industries to save jobs, ending the Bush war in Iraq, increasing Pell Grants to help college students. Don't quit on your own hopes and dreams. You know, Langston Hughes said, let your dreams go, because without dreams, life is a winged bird that cannot fly. Fellow Americans, together we can continue to shape this new Jerusalem, which still inspires hope in the hopeless, still provides vision to visionaries, still empowers the powerless, and provides a path for those who would walk for freedom and work for justice. Don't you quit. Don't quit. Thank you.
And we hope that tonight's presidential debate is as exciting as this one was. That concludes tonight's debate between the candidates for Pennsylvania's 5th Congressional District. Now that you've gotten to know the candidates, make sure you put that knowledge to use by casting your vote on November 6th. Please note a recent ruling to postpone implementation of the Pennsylvania voter ID law means that you will not need to show photo identification to vote in this election. You may be asked for a photo ID, but it's not required. I'm Patty Satalia. For all of us at WPSU, thanks for watching.
This has been a production of WPSU.